Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Taming the Perilous Skies 100 Days to Launch. This is the YouTube docu-series where we track a debut author's journey from finished manuscript to fully published multimedia self-publishing extravaganza. That novel is Taming the Perilous Skies by Dr. Phil Marshall. Hey, Phil, how are you doing today?
I'm great. I'm excited for today's discussion and our esteemed guests, plural.
Absolutely. And so for those of you who are new, a little kind of background on the series, what we're doing in addition to tracking Phil's journey, right, is each week we're checking in with some really fantastic experts in writing, publishing, multimedia, design, all kinds of facets of kind of the journey to creation of a self-published novel. And so we've got a different topic every week. Early on, it started with things like inspiration. Where does that come from? We've checked in on market and genre. Last week, we talked about craft. When is your manuscript good enough? And along the way, on Phil's social media channels, Phil's providing daily check-ins as to his own activity in the process.
And so today, as we mentioned, we're joined by Phil. My name is Patrick Wimp. I'm a filmmaker, film educator, screenwriter, at the University of Iowa, among other places.
We have Joshua Pavato, a colleague at Spoken.
Joshua created, written across multiple mediums, from music to film to ebooks, audiobooks, everything under the sun, really, for Joshua. And last but certainly not least, we've got Russ Nickel. Russ is a screenwriter. He's an author of speculative fiction. He is a writer for games like Helldivers 2 and game director for the forthcoming Ledgerbound. Is the Ledger, Joshua?
That's right.
Ledgerbound.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So Russ, I would say writing for today's conversation being about writing for multimedia, there are very few people that are as well positioned as you to talk about such things. Is there anything that you'd like people to know about yourself, updates on your games, or anything you want to share with the world?
Oh, what do I want to share with the world? Oh my gosh, this is a bigger platform than I imagined. No, I think that was a perfect intro. Yeah, it's been fun getting into the game space and getting to work on some games that, people have actually played and see fans out there. And yeah, it's just been a really exciting experience so far.
I will interject that when he joined me in LA at the Nebulas, there were plenty of A-list writers around. The only one that was providing signatures was the lead writer for Helldivers 2, Russ Nickel. So I want to call that out.
A man of the people. Is that what we're saying?
It was pretty fun.
It was pretty good.
So kind of diving in, as we mentioned at the top, this is Phil's debut novel. And we're really focusing this series on debut authors, people who are, have finished that first work or looking for that extra push to kind of get across the finish line, that type of thing. And so, something that I think would be great to kind of get your take on as the kind of technological landscape really opens up different media, different platforms to everyone, honestly. What are some of the opportunities that you see for storytellers to kind of engage new audiences with their work and their worlds and all of the above?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, obviously I've ended up in the video game space, which has been really exciting. And I think video games are like 4 times as big of a market as like film and TV or something crazy, which is weird because like everybody watches movies, but not everybody plays games. But the people who play games love them so much that I guess they're just buying way more games. So I think there's obviously like a lot of competition, and the games industry exploded during COVID. So it's taken a little bit of a hit since then. But I do think it's such a cool space to get to be a writer, because you get that interactivity that puts, choices in the hands of the player. So like you have to kind of craft stories that can go all kinds of different ways based on what they do. So it's a really interesting experience. And, a place where there is potentially a weird amount of job stability for a writer. Because if you can get hired at a game company, you can have a 9 to 5 where you're like designing quests and writing plot lines and writing dialogue for the NPCs and all that stuff, just day in and day out, which on this, the last 2 games I was at, they were just steady jobs for years and years. So I think that's something that's really interesting and different compared to back when I was trying to like write screenplays and short stories, and you get hired to write one and you never know if the next one's coming. So that's certainly something I like about this industry.
One of the things that I think about with my debut work coming up, and working towards sort of a multi-pronged multimedia approach, thinking about interactive, being able to ask things of the inventor of anti-gravity from the year of 2077 and anything about the world leading up to then, right? So ask me any question, to of course audio, big, for in my world, and so that's going to be a focus, but then also even storyboarding and creating the screenplay for the AI motion picture. You and I've talked about that for now 2 years and running, I think. And so I'm wondering what your perspective is, if you were to cast ahead like 5 or 10 years, what are the different media dimensions, technology, media dimensions that a person bringing their debut work to life is going to think about, as opposed to just throw the ebook into Kindle Unlimited and pray for the best?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I mean, I know with your work you're doing at Spoken and in the AI space, like I do think there is probably opportunity to train, there already are like chatbots that imitate celebrities, or like OnlyFans models. I don't know if we or stuff like that.
I don't know.
So I think like it would be so interesting.
OnlyFans. Let me Google that.
Only. I feel like, if you could train things that, are your characters so people can have discussions with them, that would be so cool. It's kind of like one thing that we're talking about too for our upcoming game, or that our last game did, is like people do in-universe tweets and stuff. Like Super Earth for Helldivers 2 is always sending news updates about what's going on in the war or whatever. And we might have different, like accounts for our different characters. And I feel like that could be really fun as a debut author to get people engaged, to be able to like chat with the different characters and have them posting, especially if it takes place in any sort of fun alternate reality like yours does. Like, what does the news look like in the world of Taming the Perilous Skies, right? Like, that could be really fun to see.
I love that. On October 19th, maybe I'll kick off the actual news flashes as if it were October 19th, 2076. That'd be kind of cool. And Joshua, I know that you've been thinking about, you've been in the music, the AI-driven music industry as well. And so it's like creating your own soundtracks and, and what do the characters listen to, or what's the soundtrack behind this? And I don't know, you've dabbled in that entire dimension as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Music's been a huge part of this journey. And the music that I did create ended up becoming the backbone of the audiobooks and the stories for the audiobooks. So I'm always thinking from music upwards. That's sort of the building block. But you're right. And sort of imagining in the same way you might imagine how a character would tweet in that year, or how the news might look. What is the culture of music? How has that evolved? What does music sound like? Can you create something in that realm and share it with people? It's creating its own new style, its own channel, its own playlist. So I think those things are really exciting, and they get people engaged for sure.
And so one of the things that's going to be possible is the AI motion picture. I mean, not about motion picture, but at least like series of scenes, or that kind of thing, and maybe they're all, instead of landscape, they're all portrait. They're all on TikTok instead. And which is filmmakers, I'm sure, probably horrifies all of you, but you know, I don't know. What do you think about that, Russ? The whole storyboarding and screenwriting, you know, in parallel. Just, you know, it reminds me of Stanley Kubrick and Arthur C. Clarke doing 2001: A Space Odyssey, which, by the way, had its U.S. release on my birthday. I will not say what year. Yeah. So, what do you think about that, though, on just people being able to deliver their own AI movie at the same time?
Yeah, as a film person, does it scare me? Absolutely. It's getting so impressive already. One of my roommate from grad school who was studying directing, he just posted an AI like music video he made that like blew up and got a bunch of traction. And he now has like decided that's the industry he's going to go into, and is like talking to brands about like what was cool. I'm just rambling, but there was so much like shot direction, you know, you got like really crazy drone shots and low angles. And I think as a director, he had to like iterate and do it over and over and constantly rework the camera, but it still like required that artistic eye, which was really cool. So like still there was such artistry and such of like a directing vision, even with a tool set that most or a lot of people would probably be like, oh, that's taking the art out of it. So it's sort of like a cool combination.
I like the use of the word tool set, right? Joshua and I have done a lot with AI video in the recent months, building like these book trailers for Spoken, among other things. And yeah, there's really kind of like two parts of my experience with it. One is like terrifying when you see like, you know, the new Google thing where people are singing and dancing like the 1940s, and it might as well be real. But you know, to your point, right, that ability to, you know, have a new tool, a big word we use with the audio at Spoken is democratized, right? Giving the tool to people who couldn't do a lot of these things. And it's like, you know, what will people create is, you know, there's a lot of hope, I think, and promise there, in addition to some justifiable fears.
Yeah, and some additional to that, there's some industry trends showing that, you know, there's a broader acceptance. You have directors like Darren Aronofsky, who's creating his own AI studio. It's just for AI film. Really respected auteur director. And so it's exciting to see the industry, you know, comfortably moving in that direction too. And that opens up the door for a lot of creators.
And Russ, you live in LA. I'm sure that that's a widely held opinion. Am I right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we'll see. It is, I'm very curious, you know, especially like we talk about, you know, I'm sure you've had the AI discussion a million times about what it's trained on and stuff, but I do feel like with the Disney lawsuit, it's very interesting. But if we could get past that, if it could all be, you know, like New York Times just sold its library, right? So then like once everything's above board, I feel like then a lot of the qualms will be handled and there'll be even more acceptance than there already is.
One of the really interesting things there is likenesses. So likenesses of voice, likenesses of appearance. And, you know, what Joshua was visiting here in Portland last week, and I've said, okay, it's between you and Patrick and, you know, and a couple of other folks on being, you know, my lead character who's going to get it, you know. And you know, Patrick would have to shave his head in order to do it. And so I think Josh was in the lead on that. But the use of likenesses, you know, is interesting. I met a gentleman who used to run AI for Google, be their lead strategist, and has created a company that takes people's likenesses and then, you know, allows that to be used with rights obtained by the celebrity to be then used for these kinds of things. And so, Joshua, I don't know if you want to go ahead and get in on that before we start doing the shooting, but it's an interesting thing. I don't know, Russ, what you think about like just likeness and rights and all of that, and what kind of role that's going to have.
The SAG video game voice actors were on strike for quite a while, like maybe a year and a half, about that exact thing, because they have so much VO. If they do a bunch of VO for a company, then is the company allowed to use their voice and train an AI to then produce content, you know, sort of for forever? And that was sort of the main striking point. And I think they ended up reaching a deal where then, you know, whenever the voice is used, they get some kickback or something, so that like it's not just this free infinite thing. And I think, you know, that made sense to me. Like, I feel like as long as everyone comes to terms that make sense and it's not just like trained forever, then everyone benefits probably.
Russ, you know, you kind of brought up earlier some of the kind of ins and outs of writing for games, right? You're writing for quests, you're writing for interactivity. And I know, you know, Phil, you're exploring a lot of branches to go with Taming the Perilous Skies, from, as you said, being able to kind of chat with your main character inside the world and other things. So I would love, Russ, just a little bit of insight from you, you know, game writer, you've written for games. Like, what are kind of some of the differences or nuances or even, you know, opportunities writing across these different spaces?
Yeah, I think one thing that's been super interesting is just sort of the barrier to entry isn't exactly the right word, but like the difficulty of project, where like writing short stories was something I did because it's so attainable. They're short, it's just you write them, you can send them out to magazines because they have open submissions. So like if you're really super debut, if that's where this is geared, like I think writing short stories is one of the best things you can do to, you know, train up your skills, because you can get them published, you know, get a little money. You can track how many rejections did I get, how many personal rejections, how many, you know, revision requests, how many sales. And then like, you know, for novels, it's still just you. You have to get an agent, but at least agents accept requests. And then like once you get into screenwriting, obviously you guys know, like there's no place to send your screenplays. You have to like live somewhere and meet people. So it's still sort of just you on the screenplay front, but then there's no longer an outlet. And then if you're trying to actually like make a film, you know, like a short film or a movie, like you need such a giant crew and you need so many people, which obviously if you can do an AI thing, that democratizes it. And then games, I think, to me, are even crazier than movies, because like Helldivers 2 took years and years and years to make, and that was a team of, you know, like 100 people working 40 hours a week over like 5 to 8 years or something. So when it comes to how like attainable any of these different platforms are, I think there's like some cool games that I've played that are just by a single creator, you know, maybe like a visual novel that can be short and like one person can make and you could interact. But if you wanted to ever actually make a game, like a full-on game of a property, it's just like such an undertaking.
Well, I did see the manuscript for the Rockstar Grand Theft Auto game, and it was next to like, you know, your average screenplay.
Right.
And the manuscript for the game was like a tower. So I can imagine for Helldivers 2, it must have been, I can't imagine, you know.
Yeah, not as big as a Rockstar game, but yeah.
One of the things it brings up in my mind, it's a little bit like my likeness question earlier, is what does it mean to have a story? You know, I mean, I'm a little, I don't know, I'm kind of skeptical that with decreasing attention spans, that full on novels, big works are going to continue to be the mainstay. You know, it just seems like there's going to be something about a story that then can manifest, like I said, in different, you know, and we're going to be exploring different modalities. But I don't know, Russ, what do you think about that? The idea of what is story? Like, what are you protecting? What's the idea? What's the progression? You know, what does story mean? Does it have to start with a novel? I mean, you know, tell me, man, what story? I'm looking for an answer. Hurry.
I mean,
Did I say anything else?
I mean, I feel like my partner, she's trying to cut down, but you know, she's a costume designer seamstress. So like she's working with her hands so she can have content on all the time. And so she would be watching YouTube like 8 hours a day, and super compelling stories, right? That are often just vloggers, you know, maybe it's digging into a cult or some true crime or who knows what, but like they're absolutely telling a story. Although that said, I do feel like with the short attention span thing, I'm like one of the people who doesn't buy in yet. Snapchat as a film medium and Quibi as a film medium, and there were a bunch of other competitors, and I think everyone still ended up watching The Last of Us. So I feel
right.
like it's different, and when it comes to really well crafted story that is like told in like a filmic way or in a prose way, I feel like the attention span is still there for feature films and TV. And then like I haven't ever seen that detail of storytelling in short form take off. Short form seems to be more the parasocial, like relate to the storyteller as they talk and seem like a regular person to me.
That's a really interesting thing to think about speculative fiction, just, in that domain for a moment, and how you use the example of The Last of Us, how story comes to life through more detail and through, several scenes, not just a single scene, right? It has to have an arc. There has to be some sort of resolution, and there has to be, character journey, and that requires a certain amount of ink, right? Or a certain amount of pixels. And so story, big story, I guess, is that, enough story. I don't know, what do you call it? Story enough? The last of story, the story is us.
I think to that idea of, novels length, time, something to consider, right, is like, again, to the what is story of it all. Story for me is largely about emotion, right? It's a simulated emotional experience. If you're talking about narrative fiction, or engaging with, the emotions of another human being's story in something like documentary. And emotions kind of take time to earn. Certainly things like comedy, we can quick hit and just, grab somebody and that can be extremely communicative and extremely effective. But to your point, Russ, I think like there is always going to be that space for the full novel, the feature film, the 13 hours of, Last of Us or whatever, thing that you're personally into, because like you can have that profound emotional experience in a way that, it doesn't really exist elsewhere. Maybe someone will prove me wrong, but, I think these things kind of stick around for that reason.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I love the idea. I'm going to use that like emotions take time to earn. And that's why I always, because I teach film too, I think we've talked about it before, but, to my very early students, when I teach them like very standard structure, daily life sequence, inciting incident, denial of the call, like all that stuff, like at first they're usually trying to be, fancier and more auteur, and they're like, I reject all of this. And I'm like, these are not rules that I have created. Like, these are rules that are the distillation of thousands of years of storytelling, where like if something happens to a character, I don't care unless I've gotten to know that character. All this story structure stuff is about earning those beats. So yeah, that's so true.
Well, that's a disappointment, given that I don't like emotions or emotional journey. I don't like writing. I don't like, I just want, there's something that just fell on that guy over there and he's probably dead. So, that's interesting, right? That's enough.
Not every story has to obey the rules.
You'll love this, Russ. I told Nancy, I said, Nancy, I would do anything for the little, tiny little blurb at the front of the cover, right at the top of the cover.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, listen, I said, you don't even have to read the book, right? You already know it's going to disappoint you. So this is the blurb I want. I had hoped for better, Nancy Kress. So, by the way, she's as lovely as 2 years ago when we met at Chow's Toolbox. So, but yeah, on that, being able to write for the emotional arc and get in the reader's head on how you now know these things to become true. Oh man, what a struggle for me. I'm still working at it, still working at it.
Are we all?
Well, we were sort of at the top of the hour. I know that people at Spoken World know this, but anybody who sees this video, Russ is a problem child in a lot of ways. He caused the whole spoken thing to happen with his crazy little story of killing his POV character in the first scene, which caused me to write a story. I can kill 6 people in a story. Their POV. Let me show you about killing people, and and that then led to Spoken. So for all of that, thank you and curse you and all the above.
You're welcome, and I'm sorry.
Perfect.
Russ, I've got one more kind of question to throw at you, and Joshua, feel free if you've got anything too. I guess first and foremost, like where did you start? Did you start in screenplay? Did you start with as an author? Where did you get your start?
As a kid, I always wanted to be a writer and thought I would write books because that's all I knew about. So I was planning going down the creative writing track for a while, and then found screenwriting. Thought, ooh, this is so fun. I don't have to write so beautifully with the prose. So then went and studied screenwriting for grad school, and then, was sort of like eking out a living, giving script notes, getting hired to write random indie scripts here and there. So along the way, I was writing short stories, as I was saying, to like just get to publish stuff and hone my craft and all of that. So yeah, it was kind of simultaneous screenwriting and prose writing. Still haven't written a novel, but then had built up enough of a body of work that when a friend, was like, I need a video game writer who's like a sci-fi comedy person. I'm like, look, sci-fi comedy stuff, I've done it. And they're like, great. You seem sort of qualified. I bet I could sneak you in here. So yeah, that was my little journey.
No, that's great. And the reason I kind of asked is like, kind of one of the kind of parting things we've asked everyone is like, any advice for people who are just getting started? I know you said you haven't written a novel, but you wrote those short stories. You went through the grind of like figuring out how to work consistently as a writer. You brought that up at the beginning. That is a big goal that some of us don't think about until we're in quite deep. So I guess any advice for people who are kind of early on this writing journey?
A couple big things for me are like, one is just, as I'm sure you've heard a million times or maybe even said on this, is like butt in chair time. Like it just is about producing writing. I think I have friends or students who like too often are waiting for inspiration to get their writing done. And I love when I enter the flow state and inspiration happens. That's beautiful. But then like if I only did that, I don't think I would be a writer because I just would not produce enough content. So it's just about like forcing yourself to set a goal, write a certain number of words, get a scene done. Usually I can't tell when I go to revise if I wrote something when I was the most inspired I've ever been, or if I wrote something when I was exhausted. It's just about getting it done, I think. And then the other big thing that I've done is I like gamified rejection. I think like setting goals that are in your control is really important. So if your goal is like, I want to sell a novel, well, the person who decides to buy your novel is in charge of that goal, right? So you have to hope that someone has the same taste and lines up with that and buys your novel. So for me, like when I was doing all the short stories, I set my goal at getting 100 rejections for the year.
Oh, cool.
Because I'm like, oh, I just have to write enough stories that I can have enough on sub that I can get rejected often enough. And so like, it's really fun when a story gets bought, but then you're like, oh crap, now I need to write another story. And it makes rejections kind of exciting because you're getting closer to your goal every time you receive a rejection. So instead of hoping, oh, my goal is to sell a story, oh, I'm so sad that this one didn't get sold, I'm like, oh yeah, that's fine. I'm just one step closer to my 100.
And in case 100 rejections aren't enough, go for 120 like I did.
Exactly.
And decide, screw it, I'm going to self-publish.
Always a good option.
All part of the journey.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
Right. That's right.
Joshua, you're kind of new on our interview. So anything, from you on kind of getting started, getting your writing out there, like you've gotten your writing out there in so many different spaces, and you've created traction with music, and obviously I know you creatively, and you're extremely talented, extremely entrepreneurial. So I think that there are probably many good things you could share with the self-published hopeful authors out there.
Yeah, sure. I think one of the most beneficial aspects of creating multimedia has been that each new dimension of seeing story informs the other. So I would recommend to authors, to any creators, to try and create their story or see their story in a new light, as many dimensions as you can, tangible dimensions, musical dimensions. It's going to inform your story in one way or the other, and it's going to make it better. It has for me, and I just think it is such a fantastic practice to partake in. Whether it's on your own or finding someone to do it for you, collaborate with, or pay, it will inform you. And that's my biggest takeaway from my journey.
Awesome.
Yeah, great. I think great way to close out our conversation on multimedia. Phil, anything
perfect.
before we kind of send people off to join us next week?
Just my enormous gratitude for all of you, Russ and Joshua, for your insights, and Pat for your leadership on it. Russ, we're going to be continuing to follow your journey. Can't wait for 6 months from now when we start interacting with another hilarious world. And
That's right.
I'm going to be leaning on you personally, because that whole storyboard idea of the motion picture, I know you're going to be busy, but I'm not going to let you completely shake me. So
All right, I'm ready.
So all right, I appreciate that, and thanks for your support on this journey.